A diplomatic storm is brewing in Geneva. What will it bring about? In an exclusive interview with GTV.
வணக்கம் நேயர்களே, இன்றைய தினம் GTVயின் சிறப்பு நேர்காணலோடு இணைந்து கொண்டிருக்கிறோம். இந்த நேர்காணலில் நம்மோடு பங்கேற்பவர் ஐரோப்பிய பாராளுமன்றத்தின் பிரித்தானியாவுக்கான முன்னாள் உறுப்பினர் திரு ராபர்ட் ஈவன்ஸ். திரு ராபர்ட் ஈவன்ஸ் ஐக்கிய நாடுகள் சபையின் மனித உரிமைகள் கூட்டத்தொடர் தற்போது ஜெனீவாவில் நடந்து கொண்டிருக்கும் ஐக்கிய நாடுகள் சபையின் மனித உரிமைகள் பேரவையின் கூட்டத்தொடரில் பங்கேற்ற பிற்பாடு லண்டன் திரும்பியிருக்கிறார். திரும்பிய பிற்பாடு GTVக்கு வழங்கும் பிரத்யேக செவ்வியது. Hello everyone, welcome to this special show on GTV where we are going to interview Mr. Robert Ivans, who's the former member of European Parliament who represented Britain, and he also headed the delegation for relations with countries of South Asia when he was the member of the European Parliament. Mr. Ivans, welcome to the show.
Hello, welcome.
Vanakkam. Yeah, so I'd like to start the interview by asking you about the proposed resolution against Sri Lanka at the UNHRC. What is your take on the resolution? How do you read it? I'd like to get your observations on the content of the resolution as well as the context in which it has been brought up at the UNHRC.
Well, thank you very much. I've been in Geneva this week at the UNHRC. I went there with the transnational government of Tamil Eelam, an organisation which I support, and they asked me to go. Well, the draft resolution is very modest, and I know there are many in the Tamil community who feel it's weak, that it should be much stronger. It doesn't call for the full independent international inquiry that many of us, me included, believe should take place. But it is a critical resolution. It is a resolution that poses questions, and it is one that the Sri Lankan government don't like. They had a huge delegation there in Geneva trying to counter the lobbying and information that we were doing. And my role, along with others, Joan Ryan, a former Member of Parliament, Siobhan McDonough, distinguished Member of Parliament for Mitcham and Morden, and other people, what we were doing is talking to the representatives of the different countries, the ambassadors of the different countries, explaining about the resolution, why we thought it was important, and answering any questions they had about the particular situation in Sri Lanka at the moment and what had happened over the last few months since May 2009. And of course this was all in the light of the showing of the second Killing Fields film which they had shown to them in Geneva and the follow-up from that.
Yeah, I'll come back to the Channel 4's newly released documentary. Meantime, how successful has this lobbying been? I mean, what sort of responses have you been getting from the diplomats and members representing the member states of the UNHRC?
I found the response was good. It'd be wrong of me to say it was overwhelming support. It was good. Countries are naturally a little bit reluctant to be very critical or too critical of another country. But it's a draft resolution that's been put down in the name of the United States, obviously a powerful country. And I went around talking to people from a number of different countries, particularly African countries, because I could speak in my modest French to them. So I would talk with people from Senegal, Mauritania, Mauritius, and some of the other countries, French-speaking places, where we could explain to them why it was significant and why it was important that they supported it. Now, until it actually comes to the vote, and I'm not quite sure when the vote will be, it'll be difficult to say how successful our lobbying was because we don't know how they vote in the end. But they will, of course, each country has an ambassador and other representatives. They will be talking amongst each other. They'll be talking to their counterparts in other similar countries, whether it's the African Union or whatever organisation it is. They will also be talking to their own governments back home in their capital, And I have to say they'll also be heavily being pressured by the Sri Lankan government representatives there, who will be asking them to reject it, and whose line will be, look, we've got the LLRC already, we don't need others, we're dealing with it, we've set up inquiries, and leave it to us. And I don't think that's enough, and that was our message that we were putting across to the other countries.
Well, I mean, there are reports that there are deep divisions among the member states of the UNHRC as to whether this resolution should be taken up for voting. And I mean, from your understanding, I mean, how likely is it that this will be successful? I mean,
I sense it will be put to the vote. I sense it will be put to the vote. But as I said, it would be wrong to say that everybody was unanimously in support of it at all. They don't like to be casting criticisms over another country, and where sadly it's not impacting on them. The situation in Sri Lanka to the outside world is not it sounds dreadful, but to a lot of countries it's not a major concern. It's not a big issue. There's no chance of it spilling over into their own countries. It wasn't like, or isn't like, Iraq or Afghanistan or the Middle East. It was contained in Sri Lanka, and so some of the other countries, I sense, feel leave it alone, let the Sri Lankan government sort it all out, which is obviously an inadequate and inappropriate way to continue.
You mentioned Channel 4's second documentary, Sri Lanka's Killing Fields, Unpunished War Crimes. What sort of impact has it had on these sessions? Has it helped increase the awareness as to what happened in the final stages of the war and the alleged war crimes perpetrated by the Sri Lankan troops?
I think it was very timely, very opportune to come at the time of this Geneva conference, this Geneva meeting. You could argue there was a lot in it that was very similar to the first one, which the representatives will have seen, but there was also a distinctive, clear message, and the message in the second one was certainly the President's brother, Gotabaya, but almost certainly the President himself, President Rajapaksa, knew what was going on. He was aware of the deliberate policy of targeting civilians, and he could have stopped it. Now, either he ordered it, in which case he's complicit in it, or if at the very least he knew about what was happening, and when he's on television saying, oh, it's only 5,000 or 10,000 people, he knew that was untrue at the time. He knew it was a figure much higher than that, probably at least 10 times that, and there are others I met who argue that it could have been as many as 100,000 lives lost. And I believe that President Rajapaksa knew this, knows it now, and this is now all part of a massive cover-up, because he doesn't want an international inquiry, because as the Killing Fields showed, the Sri Lankan army, the Sri Lankan military and the Sri Lankan politicians at the highest level knew what was going on and condoned it.
Well, you mentioned the apparent hesitant attitude of many of the countries, in terms of calling for an international investigation into the alleged war crimes. Now, there is, the Channel 4 documentary clearly stated that the Sri Lankan government deprived the civilians trapped in the war-affected areas of being able to access food and medication, and it clearly stated that it amounts, it constitutes a war crime. Yeah. So why is there such reluctance to call for an international investigation? What do you think is the reason? Does it also go on to show how self-centered many of these countries are? What is your opinion?
Well, I think that there's a number of reasons here. If the resolution was as strong as you and I might like, and said all the things that we've just been discussing and called for an immediate international investigation, it would be much more difficult to get it passed. And so, as I said at the beginning, this is a weaker resolution than perhaps it could have been. there is reluctance, I'm sure, and difficult quite to know why, but I perhaps understand it. The other countries are reluctant to demand an international investigation. No guarantee that the Sri Lankan government or the president would allow an international inquiry. This is a government that has systematically refused to allow in the international press, international media, any form of observers to the horrific things that went on in the spring and of 2009, wouldn't allow in people to see it. So the footage is not official footage from international journalists at all. It's taken from mobile phones of soldiers and other people, which actually in some ways I think makes it more authentic, because it's going to be very, very first-hand, whereas if it had been journalists, they'd been a little bit further away. But I think for all those reasons, everybody realises it's a very sensitive issue, and the Sri Lankan government does not want an international inquiry, doesn't want an investigation by people into these affairs. This is why they say they will investigate it themselves, which is clearly unsatisfactory.
You said that it would have been much more difficult to get it passed if had this resolution been a bit more strongly worded, right? So, I mean, do you think the Sri Lankan government also senses that this could be the starting point, even though this this has failed to meet up the expectations of many human rights activists? Do you think that the Sri Lankan government feels this could be the starting point?
Oh, I'm sure, yes. I mean, let me say, I had nothing to do with the drafting of the resolution. It was an American resolution that's drafted by the United States and put together there. But undoubtedly, this is what the Sri Lankan government don't like it as it is. And in some ways, we can say that that means it's okay from our point of view. Okay, it's not wonderful, it's okay, because if they don't like it, if they thought it was all right, then it wouldn't be strong at all, it wouldn't be worth the paper it was written on. But they were heavily lobbying against it and are continuing to argue that they don't want countries to support it. So there is a lot in it. There are a lot of key messages on it, asking them to make serious changes and to open up to the rest of the world.
One of the excuses the Sri Lankan government has come up with is that the troops of the Western countries have committed alleged atrocities in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan too, and hence they ask not to be pressurized into investigating these alleged crimes. How do you see this? I mean, do you think it will make a strong case for the Sri Lankan government?
No, I don't think that's a good case, because I don't doubt that. In every war is a horrific thing, and there are war crimes and troops committing rape and murder and destruction of property. It has, I'm afraid, happened in all sorts of wars, and we know that the coalition forces in Afghanistan are not immune from this, and there are allegations of things there, but those have been investigated. Now here we have very serious, very unpleasant, nasty allegations against the Sri Lankan military, and abuses and rape, which I think most people reasonable people would say, yes, of course it happened. It does happen in war, and the Sri Lankan government cannot just brush them under the carpet and ignore it. And to say, well, it goes on everywhere is not good enough. Is not good enough, is not an excuse at all. But I think the real point is one that you alluded to earlier on in the footage. It's that the government was knowingly, if not deliberately, knowingly starving people in an area where they'd put them, an ever decreasing area, and also targeting them. And that video Killing Fields showed, which the government of Sri Lanka has got to provide evidence to dispute, that they were deliberately shelling those areas and that they could target their shells within 100 meters or so, and they knew exactly what was going on. They knew the coordinates of the hospitals, and they were pinpointing and targeting those deliberately. If that's not true, then the Sri Lankan government, the president and his brother, have got to come out now and say why it's not true and what is their evidence to counter the arguments being put forward.
Now, we learned that you have called on English cricketers who are touring Sri Lanka at the moment not to visit the country and return. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, I wrote an article some months ago, not alone, because the distinguished former England captain and journalist Michael Atherton had also said the same things. But I wrote an article saying that now was not the time for England to be playing cricket in Sri Lanka while there were all these question marks. And in the light of the second Killing Fields film, I think it is highly inappropriate and politically naive, if not dangerous, for Andrew Strauss and the England cricket team to be there. Now, I know this was raised at the press conference in Colombo, and Strauss said, well, in fact, I didn't hear it, but he said, in fact, I'm a cricketer, I'm not a politician. But you cannot absolve yourself from complete responsibility. I doubt whether the cricketers have seen Killing Fields, because it's probably not being shown on the channels in Sri Lanka. But they must be aware of some of the issues. The ECB, the England and Wales Cricket Board, are certainly aware of the issues concerned. The British government, the Foreign Secretary William Hague, will have certainly seen the video, both the first Killing Fields and the second ones. And I think certainly the England cricket team should not be playing there. I think if there's a reception with the president, it will be highly inappropriate, difficult for the players, I understand, but highly inappropriate for them to be shaking hands with someone who I believe should or may soon be charged with war crimes, and they wouldn't want that on their hands. They wouldn't be shaking hands with Robert Mugabe now. They wouldn't be allowed to do so in those circumstances. And a journalist from The Independent said it's too late for the cricket team to be called back now. Well, it may disrupt the cricketing timetable, and I'm a big cricket fan, a big cricket supporter, but I believe if the British government said now to the England Wales Cricket Board, we don't think it's appropriate for you to be playing Test cricket in Sri Lanka in these circumstances, we want you to bring those cricketers home, and the cricketers did come home, it would be an enormously significant message, an international message, that the British government and the international cricket community, the International Cricket Council, do not tolerate or do not wish to play against a country in these circumstances. And you know, those people who argued a generation ago it was all right to send cricket teams to South Africa were apologists for apartheid, and they keep very quiet about it now. And I wouldn't want the present England cricket team to be tarnished by being apologists for war crimes, because I don't believe the players are. I believe it's a level above them, which is why I believe they should come home. I don't think they will, but I believe they should.
Coming back to the international the dynamics in which all these things are taking place, and the criticism leveled against the international community by the Sri Lankan government aside, there's also criticism against the international community by human rights activists who say that, who ask as to why action was not taken when the war was going on. I mean, they cite the case of Libya, where the international community, the Western countries promptly intervene, but it did not happen in the case of Sri Lanka.
No.
What is your stance?
Well, there is a difference, and I'm not going to defend that, but there is a difference from the point of view of Libya, and Libya indeed Syria. The Sri Lankan government has complete and total control over who comes in to the island, into the country. You can only get to Sri Lanka, really, the international community can only get in through the airport in Colombo. And so they have complete control over which politicians, which journalists come in, and who goes into the country, and then where they go. There aren't other borders over which they could go, roads that they could come in on. Realistically, people aren't going to get into, or not many people are going to go into Sri Lanka by sea, going in through Trinco or Galle Harbour or anything like that. Certainly not international figures. And the international community, short of invading Sri Lanka, which the world is a little bit wary of doing things like that after what happened in Iraq and everything. Now, I called at the time for UN peacekeeping troops to be in Sri Lanka, as it did others. But unless the Sri Lankan government was going to allow UN planes to land at Colombo Airport, it wasn't going to happen. There aren't other places where they could easily put in a lot of troops without it being seen as an international invasion. So Sri Lanka is protected from the international community through being an island, and the situation in Libya was slightly different from that point of view.
Is there anything else that you'd like to convey to the Tamil community living in the diaspora in regard to the latest development?
Well, I think to the Tamil diaspora in this country and to elsewhere around the world, that there is a good body of people who are working on your behalf. I referred earlier on to the very good work of the transnational government of Tamil Eelam, the Global Tamil Forum, and other groups who are working very hard. And I think, tragic as it is and sad as it is for people to see, and particularly, I can't imagine what it's like for the Tamil diaspora to see the Killing Fields film again, that may just be the extra piece that breaks the Sri Lankan government, which is why I've been in Geneva trying to argue for this resolution to go forward. The other point which I've been trying to put some pressure on is, of course, that Sri Lanka is a Commonwealth country, and next year, I believe, the Commonwealth heads of government is supposed to be there. Yeah. And there is, to my mind, absolutely no way whatsoever that the Commonwealth countries, the Commonwealth heads of government, should be going to Sri Lanka as guests of President Rajapaksa and giving credibility to his regime while these questions remain unanswered. If there's an international inquiry that's independent and fair and completely vindicates Sri Lankan government and their troops, which I don't think it would do, but if that were to be the case, well, it would be different. And if the Sri Lankan government has nothing to hide, if they are as innocent and pure and honest as they claim, well, then they wouldn't have a worry about having an international investigation, because it would exonerate them. But they don't want to have anything to do. They don't like other people interfering with them. And unless, which I don't believe is going to happen, they're given a clean bill of health, there's no way, to my mind, that the Commonwealth heads of government meeting should be there next year whatsoever. And that will be a powerful message that the international community doesn't accept the government as legitimate. It describes itself as a democratic socialist government. I don't believe the government of Sri Lanka is democratic or socialist. I think it's a very unpleasant dictatorship. Well, no, it's elected, so it's been elected by the people, but it's a military backed government that I believe should stand charged with war crimes.
Mr. Robert Evans, thank you very much for your time and the insights you have offered. Thank you.
Nandri, wanakum.
Nandri.
A diplomatic storm is brewing in Geneva. What will it bring about? In an exclusive interview with GTV.